Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Storm in the Village by Miss Reed. April was being as warm and lovely as March had been rough and wet. The gardens in Fairacre were at their best, full of color and fragrance, and Mr. Willet's little cottage garden was one of the loveliest. I'd spent the first part of the Easter holidays with friends by the sea, but returned to Fairacre about a week before term started to do a little spring cleaning with Mrs. Pringle's grudging assistance, some gardening odds and ends, and shopping which are difficult to fit in during term time. Amy, my old college friend who lives at Bent on the other side of Caxley, spent 2 days with me whilst James, her husband, was away on business, and we talked so much that we were quite hoarse. "The trouble with you," said Amy severely, watching me look up Mr. Roberts' telephone number in the book, "is that you don't train your mind. In some ways you've got quite a good mind," she continued more kindly, "but you don't apply it." I said I didn't quite follow this. "Well, fancy wasting all that time looking up a telephone number you must want dozens of times during the year. You should remember it." "But I can't," I protested. "You could," insisted Amy, prodding me quite painfully with her knitting needle. 213, I said, having found Mr. Roberts' name. "There you are," said Amy triumphantly. "What a simple one to remember. 2, have the first number, add the 2 together for the third. Child's play." "But I've got to remember 2 to begin with," I argued. "Supposing I'd thought of 6 and have that and added it and all the rest. I'd probably get the Caxley swimming bath." "Tcha," said Amy. "It's just a matter of association. For instance, I always remember my mother's number, 237, because the 23 bus goes by the door and the house is number 7. "Well, Mr. Roberts doesn't have any buses passing his house, and the farm's called Walnut Tree Farm, so that doesn't get us very far." "Of course, if you're going to be plain naughty," said Amy loftily. "There's always the book," I pointed out. "What's your car number, do you know?" shot Amy at me. "Yes," I said promptly. I stopped short. "No, I don't know. I would have known if you hadn't put it out of my head by asking." "And what would you do," said Amy with heavy sarcasm, "if a policeman asked you?" "I'd get out and walk round to the back of the car and tell him," I responded. "If you hadn't got the car," shouted Amy rudely. "Then I doubt if the occasion would arise," I answered with maddening insouciance. Amy was on the point of gibbering when the idiocy of the conversation overcame us both, and we laughed so much that it was some minutes before I could ring Mr. Roberts. By that time I had to look his number up all over again. We walked down to Mr. Willet's cottage after tea. It was a perfect evening, sunny and still. The young leaves were more golden than green in the evening sunshine, and the birds were singing their hearts out. Mr. Willet's cottage is a thatched one and has an uneven old brick path from the gate round to the back door. The bricks have weathered to a soft rose color and have brilliant emerald streaks between them where the moss grows, smooth and close as velvet ribbon. The path to the front door is seldom used. The knocker is encrusted with paint and is difficult to lift, but I remember the story about Arthur Coggs, our village reprobate, who had wielded that knocker energetically late one night when, afire with beer and missionary zeal, he had attempted to arouse Mr. Willet's religious conscience, and had only succeeded in rousing his fury. Mr. Willet, with true peasant frugality, scorns to put his precious land down to grass anywhere. The whole of his patch is dug over with the narrowest of paths threaded here and there, and only where absolutely necessary. But he likes growing flowers as well as vegetables, unlike some of his neighbors, and his small front garden this evening was thick with velvety wallflowers of every color, from palest yellow to deep blood red. Their scent was heady and mingled with the clean, waxy smell of the small box hedging which lined the brick path. We found him bent double over the box edging, carefully parting the stubby branches with his gnarled hands. He was collecting snails and dropping them with a satisfying plop into a pail of salt water which stood on the path beside him. "Kills them in a minute," he told us, stirring the revolting, frothy mixture with a stick. "Snails love a bit of box. 10 minutes steady snailin' along the box saves a mort of damage in the garden. Come round the back, Miss Reed, and see Mother. She's dawdlin' around there somewhere." We followed him to the back of the house, admiring his neat rows of vegetables as we went. A narrow strip bordering the path was devoted to flowers, and rosy double daisies, grape hyacinths, and early pansies flourished there. "Look," I said, "your apple tree's breaking already." The tight little knots of buds were beginning to show pink streaks, and it was plain that if this warm weather lasted, Mr. Willet would have his blossoms within a week. "Much too early," said Mr. Willet, screwing up his eyes against the sun as he scrutinized this forward fellow. "Don't like to see it. Plenty of frosts yet to come." He gave the gray, hoary trunk a reproving slap and led us to the back door. Mrs. Willet was busy with her ironing, and her kitchen was filled with the comfortable smell of fresh linen. "Take a seat, do, Miss Reed," she said, indicating 2 broad wooden chairs against the wall. She smiled at Amy, and I made introductions. "I'll just finish off this shirt, and then we'll have a glass of wine," said Mrs. Willet, holding the iron to one side of her and spitting delicately upon it. A tiny ball of spittle sizzled across the surface and vanished forever floorward. "Just right," commented Mrs. Willet with immense satisfaction, and plunged the iron into the depths of an armhole. We talked while she worked, and I gave Mr. Willet the message I had brought about small school repairs. Naturally, the topic of the proposed housing estate soon arose. "I heard it wasn't just 100 acre they wanted, but a goodish bit of the downs behind," said Mr. Willet as he leaned against the doorpost. "Didn't right, you know, to take farmland like that. They say old Miller's in a fair taken about it all." "Well, I don't know," said Mrs. Willet, hanging the shirt carefully over the clothes horse. "You hears a lot about spoilin' the view and that, but I knows 1 or 2 thinks it's a good idea." "Who might they be?" inquired Mr. Willet, puffing out his mustache belligerently. "Mrs. Fowler, the Coggses," began Mrs. Willet. "Faugh! That old Tyler's Row lot," scoffed Mr. Willet with scorn. "I suppose they thinks there'll be some pickin's for them out of it. Does Arthur Coggs reckon he'll get a jammy job there when they starts buildin'? Plenty of overtime and skedaddle home when it starts to rain?" "I suppose it would bring plenty of work," said Amy. Not only work," replied Mrs. Willet. "They reckons us'd get more buses through this way, probably some every day, not 3 times a week like we has it now." Mr. Willet snorted his disgust. "Be everlapsin' traipsin' to Caxley, then, I s'pose, wastin' time and money. I don't see no sense in it at all." "The Caxley shopkeepers might welcome the scheme," I said doubtfully. "They most certainly would," said Amy with conviction. "I was talking to Bob Lister at the ironmonger's, and he reckons that a new housing estate would probably bring half as much trade again to that end of Caxley." "Not only Caxley," pointed out Mrs. Willet. "They was saying down the baker's yesterday that Tom Prince was thinking of getting another delivery van for the bread if all these new people come. Brings trade to Fairacre and Beech Green, it would." "Miss Clare seems to think that the young people in the village would welcome the buses to Caxley," I observed. "I know Miss Jackson hopes it will come. I must say it would give much more scope to the boys and girls who've just left school." "Well, I don't like to hear it even talked of," said Mr. Willet decidedly. "I prays it won't come, and I'll back old Miller up any day in his fight. Why should the poor old feller give up his ground? He's farmed it well, ain't he, all his life, and his father afore him. There's plenty of scruffy land between here and the Atomic, fit for houses to be built on, without picking on a fine bit of farmin' land like 100 acre. He shook his head like a spaniel emerging from a stream. "Oh, well," he said more mildly, as though this energetic shaking had rid him of all tiresome worries. "What about that drop of wine, Mother? Which do you fancy, ladies, cowslip or dandelion?" "You know," said Amy, when we were back at the schoolhouse, "most people will agree with your Mr. Willet. I can foresee a real battle about this wretched project. I know people in Caxley are furious about it on the whole, particularly the avant-garde of the artistic group," added Amy shrewdly. Are they all admirers of Dan Crockford? I asked in some surprise. Dear me, no, exclaimed Amy. But when you've gone to the expense of papering one wall different from the rest and buying a Degas to put on it, you're not going to see any artist's landscape defiled for the sake of a mere atomic power station. You see, they'll be firmly on Mr. Willet's side. It was the farming of the land that weighed with Mr. Willet, I objected. It's the aesthetic value that will tell in the end, forecast Amy. Just wait and see. I hope you're right, I said fervently. Term started, and the children returned looking fit and brown, having been able to play outside during the fine sunny days of the holiday. I was sorry to see that 3 children, all from one family, had left the village, and that our numbers were down to 32, 17 in my class and only 15 in the infants' room. It's the smallest that the school has ever been, I said to Miss Jackson, looking sadly at her little class. The children were drinking their bottles of milk, sucking steadily through their straws, and gazed owlishly over the top at us as we talked. There were over 40 here when I first came. People don't have so many children these days, explained Miss Jackson kindly, as though I had been speaking of mid-Victorian times. They have fought for a higher standard of living, and they intend to maintain it, which means that the family must be of a more economic size. With the overthrow of the tyranny of church superstitions and the setting up of family planning clinics— All right, I broke in testily. There's no need to talk to me like some pink left-wing paper. And in any case, it isn't so much the size of the family, but the move to town that's defleeting us here. This makes the 3rd family within a year to leave Fairacre. They've all gone nearer the atomic station. Mr. Roberts is still looking for a really reliable cowman. We shall get an influx when the new housing estate goes up, observed Miss Jackson, or will they all go to Beech Green? I should think the children would go to either, I said, shaking my head at the very naughty little boy who had decided to empty the dregs of his milk bottle into the ear of his neighbor. I wonder if we shall have to have any new buildings. Most likely to have a colossal new school on the estate, hazarded Miss Jackson, rescuing the milk bottle. I felt uncomfortably jolted. I never thought of that, I answered slowly. I drove over to the Annetts' house that evening for my weekly babysitting session. Young Malcolm was having his jumping practice at the end of his cot, singing a tuneless and breathless accompaniment to this exercise. To his mother and to me, peeping through the crack of the bedroom door at this bundle of energy, it looked as though he would be at it for at least another hour. The usual 1,001 last-minute injunctions were given me by the departing mother, while her husband brought in coal and logs for the evening was turning chilly, and gave me the Telegraph, the Times Educational Supplement, the Farmer's Weekly, and Eagle, the last I suspected confiscated from one of his pupils. I decided to read that first, while giving an ear to Isabel's directions. Let him jump until he falls asleep, and if you can get him into the right end of the bed, all the better. If not, tuck him up where he's asleep. If he stirs, you'll find the old shawl he takes to bed with him somewhere among the covers, unless he's thrown it over the side. If he's wrinkled up in his mackintosh sheet and you can possibly straighten it without waking him, that would be a help. I've left some boiled water in a blue jug on his bunny tray in the kitchen. Not the white jug, that's got orange juice in it. And if he really seems hungry, he can have some warm milk, preferably in his mug. But if he's being frantically naughty, put it into his bottle and he may drop asleep as he takes it that way. I'm trying to break him of the bottle, but he has it occasionally at bedtime. I said I would remember all this and reached for Dan Dare. Mr. Annett called anxiously from the hall, "It's past 7, Isabel." "Coming," she said, throwing a scarf round her neck and grabbing her violin. "Oh, and one last thing, take the bottle away as soon as he's asleep." I said I would. Dan Dare appeared to be in a most awkward predicament, having been hoisted on a crane of some sort by green-faced men with claws and legs like birds. I was dying to read of his adventures. "You are a dear," said Isabel, giving me a hasty kiss and knocking Dan Dare to the floor unnoticed. She rushed from the room, and I heard the front door slam. I bent down to retrieve Eagle and heard the front door open again. Isabel's head reappeared round the door. She looked extremely agitated. Of course, if he's emptied the bottle before he's asleep, take it away in any case, or he'll get frightful wind." She vanished before I could reply. The door slammed again, the car gave a distant and impatient hoot, and finally drove off toward Caxley. I listened to my charge. He was still jumping rhythmically in the distance. Sighing luxuriously, I leant back in my chair and put my feet up on a footstool. In 10 minutes' time, I reckoned, I should insert my young godchild into the right end of his bed, put his comforting old shawl into his sleeping hand, and forget him. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to Dan Dare, who, I was sorry to see, was in an even worse plight in the last picture than in the first with the green-faced crane operators. Peace descended on Beech Green Schoolhouse as I read Eagle avidly from cover to cover to the accompaniment of the distant squeakings of the cot springs. Gradually, the squeakings grew less frequent and finally stopped. Heaving myself from the chair and throwing Dan Dare aside, I made my way upstairs to attend to my duties. 6. Trouble and Love. Miss Clare was busy putting the last-minute touches to the supper table. It had been a lovely day, and she had been pleased when Miss Jackson had said at tea-time that she thought she would cycle into Caxley and call on a friend there. "We might go to the pictures," she had said, "so don't wait for supper for me if I'm a little late. It just depends how we feel." Miss Clare had been delighted to hear about the friend. She knew that she had met 1 or 2 young teachers in the town, but had feared that her lodger's unswerving devotion to Miss Crabbe, the psychology lecturer, might stand in the way of any warm friendship elsewhere. With great delicacy, Miss Clare refrained from asking the sex of the Caxley friend, but hoped for Miss Jackson's sake that it was male, and that he was young, single, and good-looking. She was inclined to think, however, that the friend was much more likely to be female, and if it were that new gym mistress, she, alas, was no more prepossessing than Miss Jackson herself, thought Miss Clare sadly. By 10 o'clock, Miss Clare was beginning to think of bed, for she had risen at 6:30, as was her custom. She looked out of the window at the clear sky and breathed in the fragrance from her garden. The lilac was in flower, and she could see the plummy pyramids of blossom outlined against the stars. It was nearly 11 before Miss Jackson arrived. Miss Clare heard her calling good-bye and a muffled voice replying in the distance. Then came the sound of Miss Jackson's bicycle, thrown with a clatter into the shed. The back door burst open, and Miss Jackson, with flushed face and shining eyes, stood before her. She looked very happy. "Oh, you shouldn't have waited up," she said reproachfully. "I was later than I meant to be. We went to the pictures after all." Miss Clare inquired about the film. Yes, she was told it was most awfully good, but rather a short program. They had come out at 9:45. Miss Clare looked a trifle surprised, and Miss Jackson rattled on. "We were so thirsty that we went into the Bell for a drink," she explained, somewhat defiantly. "Anything wrong with that?" Miss Clare felt vaguely uncomfortable. It was obvious that Miss Jackson was very much on the defensive, and Miss Clare was beginning to wonder why. So far, no name had been given to the friend, and whether it was male or female, Miss Clare did not really know, but she was beginning to suspect that the friend was a man, and one that Miss Jackson felt she would not approve of. "I don't know that the Bell is a very pleasant place for 2 girls to enter unescorted," answered Miss Clare mildly. "I see from the Caxley Chronicle that it is frequented by a number of Irish labourers who appear regularly before the magistrate." She had chosen her words with some guile, and her manner was pleasant. Miss Jackson bolted her last mouthful of pie and placed her knife and fork across her plate with exaggerated deliberation. "As it happens," she said, raising her thick eyebrows, "I was accompanied by a man." Miss Clare congratulated herself privately upon eliciting this information. "And what's more, he saw me home, so I was well looked after." "I'm glad to hear it," said Miss Clare gently, pushing the cheese dish toward her lodger. "Would you take some of my dark purple lilac to Miss Reed in the morning?" she continued, skating gracefully away from thin ice. She has a lovely pale one, I know, but no deep purple. Of course I will, said Miss Jackson heartily. She seemed relieved that the subject had been changed, and Miss Clare's misgivings grew. Who on earth could it be? She pondered the question as she made her way wearily up the little staircase. Although it was late, it was some time before Miss Clare fell asleep. Her lodger had gone singing to bed. Miss Clare had waited for the 2 thumps which were the sign that Miss Jackson's shoes had been kicked off, for the click of the night light switch, and for the final creak as Miss Jackson clambered into the high feather bed. Somewhere in the velvety darkness, a nightingale throbbed out his song from a spray of blossom. He was urgent and languorous in turn, now brittle and staccato, now pouring forth a low, steady ripple of bubbling sound. Miss Clare lay in her shadowy room listening to him, and thinking of the girl beyond the wall, so young, so very ignorant, and so pathetically sure of herself. She's really old enough to know what she's about, Miss Clare told herself, and yet, how I wish her parents were here. She heard the church clock at Beech Green strike 2 before she fell asleep, and still the nightingale sang of love and trouble, trouble and love, as though his heart were full to overflowing. And we'll continue into this troublesome week next time.